My computer just I don't know, took a nosedive, so I'll get it back and get on video shortly.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to share. I have a presentation for today. Hopefully, at least try and guide us along here. Get set up for that. Can everybody see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right. And here comes the agenda, and I guess I'll let Barb take over for a bit.
Okay. All right. So I am calling this meeting of the Governance Working Group to order. It's 10:31 on September 4th, 2025, and I'm Barbara Neal. We are recording the meeting, and the recording will be posted on the task force webpage. Let's start with our roll call of working group members. If you could verbally acknowledge your presence when I call your name. Paul White.
I'm here.
Morning. Mike Dunges.
I am here.
Morning to you. And of course, we have our project management partners, Rick, Dom, and Elizabeth from Televate.
Good
morning. Looks like Chris Pedoti from Department of Public Safety has joined us. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning.
Morning. Okay, and we have approval of the agenda, which is up on the slide, up on the screen rather. Are there any changes needed to the agenda? Okay, hearing nothing, we'll consider the agenda approved, and we'll move on to approval of the minutes. These are the minutes from the last meeting, August 27th. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Okay, and I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, any discussion? All right, all in favor of approving the minutes from August 27th, raise your hand or indicate by saying aye. I see myself and Paul with hands up, and there's Mike's. Okay.
Sorry.
All right. We could have gotten them approved without you, but it's good to have you accounted for.
Sorry, Space Cadet.
That's okay. We're all good. The minutes are approved, and Dom, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Barb.
Yeah.
And to move on quickly, as Barb mentioned, this is the Governance Working Group. And our meeting for today fits into our schedule here. We have extended the governance working time a couple of weeks. Hopefully we'll be able to finish there, but we'll have to see how things go. It was mentioned to Barb and Paul. Looks like we've got a little overlap because we want to get Tier 1 working group rolling as well. But hopefully it won't be for too long. But for today, it's governance, and the objective for this working group is to develop recommendations for a governance structure to administer and guide the improvements to public safety dispatch throughout the state. What we have today is we have an update to the action items. Let me put this into presentation mode so it's a little easier to see. Excuse me. There we go. We have an review of the action items, and then we are moving on towards some aspects of the governance structure to talk about the potential structure itself, membership, the potential costs associated with that, and charter elements, as we think are some of the main items to define the structure and the specific governance body. Moving on to the action items. And what we're showing here are those that are remaining that have not been closed out. Well, I'm sorry, number 9. We just want to confirm that that was closed out, so that'll disappear then after today. Action item number 6, Mike, was to reach out to League of Cities and Towns. And I'm sorry, Mike, I think you told me when the next board
Thursday.
meeting was. Did that occur? I'm sorry?
It's next Thursday.
Next week, okay, sorry. All right, so that still remains open until then, as will action item number 8. That brings us down to action item number 12, just to talk about dividing up the regions. So we talked about regional representation within the governance body, and that's one of the items that hopefully we'll address at today's meeting. That brings us to action item 13, was for Barb to discuss with the Hartford Interim Police Chief. And Barb, do you have an update for us?
I have reached out to her and she was going to get back to me today. I have not heard from her yet, but it's in progress. I also reached out to St. Albans with the same type of question because
Yes.
I know that they are currently going through some staffing difficulties that they are entirely focused on. And the chief there came back with more questions than answers about whether or not they would anticipate staying in the game, so to speak, if we were to go to the 6 PSAP center option. It just generated more questions for him than anything else. So I tend to agree with that moving to a 6 PSAP exclusively option is probably not the best route to take. But we'll wait to hear from the Hartford chief as well, just to have their input and go from there.
All right, thank you.
So
Any
if I
other-
could add, yeah, it's interesting
ahead.
that in Act 78, there's some language in there that talks about the, more leaning towards creating more PSAPs than fewer. I think the rationale for that language has to do with the 2 previous PSAPs that have closed, but the language was kind of leaning towards more than less PSAPs, interestingly.
Yes, I think, yeah, the question of the closure of Derby and Rutland was on everyone's mind, I think, at that point. And
Right.
we asked Mission Critical, I think, to specifically look at the impacts of those closures and whether or not they should be a recommendation that they come back into the mix.
I believe they
Yep.
do address that in their system plan. They talk about that, and I believe they give a number of reasons as to why they do not recommend reinstituting those.
But
Right.
if I remember, maybe I imagined this, but I thought they said that if Derby and Rutland were to reopen, that we still would be limited to 6 PSAPs, but just Derby and Rutland would be 2 of them, which means that 2 others would have to drop out. Maybe maybe that was just my imagination, but
I'm
it
not
seemed
remembering what.
it seemed like they were focused on the number 6, whether it included Derby and Rutland or not.
Right.
Right. And of course, who's a PSAP is the board decision too. So,
True, of course. Barb, I'm curious, when you talked to Mo, did you get the impression that it would be his decision or would it be the city manager's decision? Was he just
well, I don't think he really, I'm reading his email now, here are the type of questions. He doesn't know how it would logistically work to have the current 6 PSAPs be the only dispatch centers in the state. How could an entity such as the state regulate what other agencies do or operate for dispatch centers? Does the state set the fees and pay? How would the communications networks reach the areas that don't have one? And so those types of questions. So I think,
of course, he's probably not, at least one of the options from Mission Critical was that agencies like St. Albans or Hartford would simply be providing a site, and that the actual function and the staffing and all that would be run by a state entity, kind of like
Right.
as a tenant. So I'm sure he probably wasn't aware of that.
right. And I don't know how Mike and Paul feel about this, but I almost think that the discussion around whether we make about making a recommendation to have 6 PSAPs only as dispatch centers, for me, that's off the table. I don't think that's a good approach. What, do you guys share that, or?
Well, I think, I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump ahead, but since I talked, I'll talk again. I think I'm not opposed necessarily to the number 6, but I don't like the fact that they're trying to define the number. I mean, I think like in the state we currently are in, if the board decided that we needed 8, you could authorize 8. Or if we
Right.
decided we needed only 4, we could shrink to 4. And I think it would be good to keep that flexibility. I don't know that we necessarily want to lock ourselves into 6 and only 6.
Right.
My perspective is, I think the more we can consolidate and hone resources to fit the right regions is better from a financial standpoint, from an operational standpoint, from a management standpoint. However, trying to wedge something in because we have something already isn't necessarily the right approach. So like I could actually, I don't want to be, I know our job is to be somewhat prescriptive, right? Like that's what we're supposed to be doing, but maybe there is a PSAP that's properly positioned for and ready for doing dispatch for one of the regions, but I don't want to say just because there are 6 PSAPs, we should have 6. Does that make sense? Like, I don't want to take off the table as a potential to be that dispatch center, but I don't know that they all should be just because they all exist. Does that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree
Does
with
make
that.
sense.
And like, for example, I think there should be one somewhere in Rutland County, or at least the southwest quadrant of the state. And that doesn't fit the current model from MCP.
Right.
And we'd be happy to host one, by the way.
Good to know.
Right.
Well, it's interesting too, because some of what prompted all of this work from the regional dispatch working group that was before this one to the task force was the Department of Public Safety kind of stating that they're not able or willing, or whatever the proper word is, to dispatch for municipalities. And if they are 2 of the PSAPs in a 6 PSAP model, I mean, that would have to be reconciled, obviously, because they couldn't be exclusive to the state agencies in that scenario. So anyway, just kind of feels like the conversation has come full circle in that regard.
So just to gauge that, a couple of the members of this working group are going to be on the Tier 1 working group, which is going to be starting in the next week or so. So I think having this conversation now and teeing it up for that working group is appropriate. I mean, that is the hard work that working group is going to be focused on.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Thank you all. And I believe Catherine just joined us. Is that right? Welcome, Catherine.
Hi, thank you.
And moving on, what I thought might be helpful before we move into further definition of what the actual structure and membership looks like, I thought it might be helpful to review the key attributes that the working group came up with previously. And if there are any additional ones or some changes we want to make here, let's discuss those. So the first one was have the governance body should have decision-making authority, and although that depends somewhat on the regional approach that comes out via the PSAPs and dispatch centers. There should be a top-level board to establish minimal technical and operational standards as part of their charter. There was agreement that there should be regional representation, although potentially not having subcommittees at each region like what is shown in some of the models proposed by MCP, just because of the sheer number of participants that would require. The general consensus was to leave the E911 board intact, at least initially. So in other words, having this board being separate from the E911 board. It should be an independent entity, and it was recognized there will need some level of administrative funding. And that's one of the items we plan to address here as well. Any additional thoughts or changes to any of these key attributes?
So I would like to add, or at least have up for discussion, specifically identifying the Vermont Emergency Dispatchers Association, Liz's group, have representation on this entity. I had a conversation with Liz Tracy between our last meeting and now, where they were asking for a voice at the table, and actually had come to me to see if the 911 board would support bringing their work into the 911 board function. And I told Liz at that point that I think the more appropriate place for that discussion is in the task force and whatever successor entity might come along. And it may end up with a 911 board or a similar entity. But anyway, I just wanted to flag that they need to have a voice at the table so that they can advance some of the very important work that they're doing.
Everyone
I couldn't,
agree? I've added that in here, at least temporarily.
That's great.
I would recommend, though, moving that up to the need top level board. It doesn't matter where it's at, but we had recommended in our last meeting when we were putting together the initial recommendations for the board composition, that they
Yes.
would have a seat at the board level.
Is this what you
Yeah.
mean, Rick? Just moving it up in the list here? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Because we're right below where we talk about need top level board to establish. So
Okay.
if I could bring up a couple of words that that I want to be sure that they're what we mean, and also maybe go a little deeper into it. So the second bullet there, need top level board to establish minimum technical and recommendations. So the comment there, to establish. I'm not opposed to the board that's going to make final decisions, but are also the work is going to be to, I don't know, I mean, are we establishing or are we authorizing based on the input of the subcommittees, because we're going to have subcommittees and they're going to be making, well, maybe not, but typically a recommendation is that the board, lights up a subcommittee, and the subcommittee goes and does the work and brings back a recommendation. And so the board then, approves and gave me the establishes. So I just want to be sure when we say to establish, is that really what we mean?
Do we want to say approve recommendations for?
Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously we haven't created the board, the governance organization yet, but I mean, and that's really why I want to have the conversation. So typically a board at that level does make decisions and does establish requirements. I just don't want to raise the concern of the larger statewide community by saying that, there's going to be a board and they're going to tell us what to do. And that's maybe the way to do it, but I just wanted to have a conversation about that statement there. I don't know, approve recommendations. I don't know if that's the right language either.
Any preference for that? Leave as established, or does approve recommendations or work better?
Well, if you say approve recommendations, it opens the question up, like where are the recommendations coming from, which I guess to Rick's point is what we haven't established yet. I guess I don't know. I don't know the best way to word that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
when we say to establish means, you know, it could come from any sources. I mean, you're establishing them. I mean, if we take away authorization, you know, the executive authorization of the board, that says the board doesn't have any authority. So I'm not opposed to what we had up there before to establish. Um, I just want to be sure that if we say establish because of the word above, they have decision-making authority. And then, you know, that authority in them says that they can establish minimum requirements that the statewide community has to follow. And I'm okay with that. I think that's fine. I just want to be sure that you know, the legislature buys into that, and the public safety community at large is also, because they're part of our governance, and you know, they may not, every individual doesn't have a seat at the board level, but their organizations are going to be represented. And so if that's the case, then yeah, they can establish the minimum requirements.
what if we just remove the words recommendations for? The top level board approves minimum technical and operational standards.
Yeah,
That works.
yeah, I like that because that's less, you know, kind of pushy.
Right, and it's up to the board to determine where those standards come from, whether we just adopt existing national standards or whether we have a subcommittee or recommend them.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay. Any other areas we want to adjust?
Yes, the third vote from the bottom should leave the E911 board intact, at least initially. Well, you know, I'm not sure. We don't want to go be attacking very viable and successful boards. So I just want to be sure that is a thought behind that statement there that perhaps the E911 board would be expanded to become the governance, you know, the public safety communications governance. Was that
That's certainly one scenario, right?
I think I know that's at least been in the back of my mind that, you know, over time, these two parallel entities could come together and be, you know, maybe named something different, but be on one entity.
Yeah, and this kind of suggests that it might, and it could be that this is how it goes, right? But this suggests that eventually the 911 board might be absorbed into, or the 911 function might be absorbed into this newly created governance. And so maybe we should word it so that either of those is possible without, yeah. Maybe just take off the words at least initially.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well.
Yeah, that's. I'm more comfortable with that. I mean, even though we don't know where, that leaves the impression that the board is there, and then we could say, well, you know, what do you mean by that? Well, you know, over time, they may merge, or they may become one, or yeah. I'm comfortable with that statement there, personally.
Any other comments?
I don't know if this is the right place to voice this or if it belongs in some other working group or at the full task force, but as we work through this, I can't shake the thought in my head that, you know, where the recommendations are that, let me back up a little bit. The 6 PSAPs that we have now, 2 from VSP and 4 from locals. I know I've been retired 9 years, but I don't think things have changed dramatically in that, you know, the 2 VSP dispatch centers while they dispatch for locals, their priority is the troopers, the game wardens, the DMV inspectors. And as a retired trooper, I'm thankful for that. But in the 4 regionals, their priorities are locals. They don't deal much with troopers on the road or game wardens. And if we go the route that Mission Critical is recommending, it's going to be critical that all 6 PSAPs be equal, level playing field. You know, everybody takes care of everybody. And I just keep coming back to, you know, what started us down this road several years ago was then Commissioner Sherling saying, you know, VSP is only going to dispatch for troopers. Everybody else is going to find their own path. And I until we get some kind of commitment that VSP is going to be fully on board with this, no matter what we come up with,
Right.
It's tough to visualize what a governance board would look like if there's always that thought out there that some future commissioner is just going to say, nah, we're just going to focus on our own personnel and the rest of you can have your little governance board and do things however you want to do them. So
I think that's like a huge unanswered question, right?
it is, and unless it's legislatively mandated, that you know, it's hard to after 30 years in the department, it's hard to visualize troopers being dispatched by local dispatch centers. It's you know, they run their own pre-basic in the police academy. They do their own firearms quals. They do everything separate from everybody else. And I just have a hard time visualizing them not wanting to have a VSP dispatcher dispatching VSP personnel. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's just the way they've always operated. And, you know, maybe, you know, Commissioner Morrison is a different animal than any commissioner I ever worked for. So maybe it's going to happen, but it's hard to see it.
So Paul, my question to that is what's your concern with the direction we're headed? Because we keep touching on the E911 stuff, or is it because we're saying an independent entity? Like where is the concern that we keep leaning too heavily towards the state in this model?
I guess my concern is that we are sort of operating under the assumption that all 6, or whatever number we arrive at, all 6 PSAPs will function the same, whether it's in Westminster, whether it's in Hartford, whether it's in St. Albans, whether it's in Williston. And that currently is not the case. It's going to be a huge sea change for that to happen.
Got it. Okay. That's if we go with the PSAP model, though, right?
Right.
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 All right.
Which I don't think is where we want to go.
No, I don't think so either.
At least not, and maybe this goes over into the tier 1 discussion more, but at least not initially. You know, that would just be massive. You talk about a sea change.
Right.
That would be massive. I mean, if we're talking about like, to your point, Paul, VSP dispatchers dispatching VSP troopers, wouldn't that still exist? But and then the locals and the county ones are doing, you know, their primary law enforcement responsibilities for dispatching. But the point is, we would have hopefully built an interoperable system where they could reach, you know, they could reach a dispatcher at one of these other facilities, regardless of, well, maybe not where they are, but regardless of who their primary dispatcher is. Wouldn't that get us a little further down the road?
I mean, yeah, on the technical side, that makes perfect sense. How do we do that from a governance?
Right. And if our goal, you know, one of the stated goals by MCP is that we try to get, we're not forwarding calls all over the place to get them dispatched to the people on the road. You know, the call is answered and the call is dispatched, whether the call is in. I don't know.
Right. Whether it's a VSP law enforcement area or a local.
Correct.
Whoever answers the call. Well,
Right.
so if we're going to bring up that point, I don't
for
agree
example,
with one state.
Right. So are we going to have a call answered by Hartford Dispatch and dispatched to a trooper in Brattleboro or wherever,
Right.
without a VSP dispatcher in the middle of that.
So this has always been my concern with the push that MCP had for the single stage dispatching.
Mhm.
It doesn't, it's not going to work in Vermont because VSP has responsibility, law enforcement responsibility for so many towns.
Right.
They would have to be the ones answering all the calls and dispatching all the responders, which is also not a good place to be in my view.
And
So
I'm not speaking against that. I'm not opposed to it. I've struggled with us putting a lot of effort into creating this governance model only to have, the colonel or the commissioner or Chris or whoever say, no, we don't want to do it that way. We want our dispatchers dispatching for our people, regardless of where the call comes in.
So, and
then
go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
No, Barbara, you first, because you have more experience in this than me.
Well, it seems to me that we need to ask the same question of the Department of Public Safety that we're asking of Connie Kelly and Mola Moth and the
Yes.
others.
Very good point.
Um,
Yeah. And of course,
But
the answer that we get back from the department, of course, is subject to the governor's opinion and future governor's opinion and future commissioner's opinion. But the same argument could be made for, Hartford, St. Albans, some future
Right.
police chief or town manager could decide, we don't want to do things that way.
Unless they legislate it, and then
Unless it's legislated.
That's where I was
Right.
going to go.
Right.
It's because, again, I think about this from a consistency standpoint, and while I agree that looking at what we have right now and saying, hey, let's just add these things could be nightmarish, probably at best nightmarish, on the existing PSAPs. If the decision was to go that way and expand that to kind of keep that single track, that would need to be legislated so that it wouldn't change, so that it wouldn't be at the whim of a commissioner. So it wouldn't be at the right. So whatever we do, if there are things like, so to go, Barbara, like let's take your example and say we've got these 6 regional dispatch centers. There is no connection to the state, and the state wants to dispatch for themselves, right? VSP wants to dispatch for themselves. That means there's going to need to be cross connects and policies and procedures that push those calls into back to the state. That's something that consistency is going to need to, that will probably need to have a legislative piece to ensure that always exists between the two, and that's funded properly so that that's paid for by the government, right? If that's what they want to do. Sorry.
well, I'm getting kind of tangled up here between all the different pieces of this. So we've got the question of whether or not 6 PSAPs is what we want to recommend. And then we've got the question of whether or not single stage dispatching, call taking, whatever you want to call it, if the single stage thing is the priority. And then we've got the discussion about the governance,
Right.
which are all kind of
Interwoven.
distinct to me.
Oh yeah.
So what is the question for this working group? That's my question. We're talking about the governance entity.
Right.
Right. Well, and I guess one question is, when we looked at the list, in the other slide deck on a different page, where we looked at the list of who might be on this state level board, the ECAC or its replacement. And we talked several times about one proposed list was very DPS heavy. It had the commissioner, it had the colonel, it had the SWIC, it had all these different DPS positions. And, if they were going to go off and do their own thing, then they shouldn't necessarily have weight on this board.
Right.
So if I can I chime in?
Yes.
All right. It's a really important conversation that we're having because, it gives us an opportunity to think not only from, the perspective of being a board member, also and also from the point of being governed by the board. And so this is exactly what, makes governance so challenging to achieve success in, but so important to achieve. But, the fact that we're thinking about, all of the representatives being affected by the board at all different levels. I think that's exactly what this is about. And so, obviously, the government affects everything we do. There's no doubt about it. So it does it higher as a kind of a, decision-making approval board, and that flows down. So that's why it has to have, and I don't think we should use the word should anywhere. We're making a recommendation, and so if we say should have, then that opens up the door. Well, what if it didn't have? So that should be. I'm like, no, we must have. Again, I'm not trying to talk you into that, but this is a governing board, and this board has a very important impact, not just currently, but for the future of public safety communications. And I mean, there are certain things that, yes, I agree, we can't be stepping into. Like second bullet there, need top level board to approve minimum technical and operational standards. And the first one there is minimum staffing. Well, minimum staffing is really difficult to I mean, again, APCO says minimum of two on board all the time. Well,
all the time.
I mean,
Right.
we have one PSAP having trouble staffing right now. So I think, things like training and certification requirements and others, we could have best practices, for achieving, and it could be minimum staffing, but there should be some training and certification. I think is a given. You've got to be able to be trained and certified, because that's what our requires and deserves. And the people want to be trained and certified too. So we take a lot of shortcuts in not getting training and certification because it's expensive and it takes staff away from doing the work. But if we're all trained and certified in certain areas, we can back one another up. And so there are certain elements that I think that the board has got to be responsible for recommending, because they're just in the best interest of the community and the first responder entities themselves, the members of public safety. So I think what we're talking about here is very doable, but it's not going to get done if we don't get legislative support. And getting the input and support of the community is going to be an outreach. I mean, the members of this board have got to do their outreach to their own communities, saying this is why it's in the best interest of statewide public safety communications that we're doing this. So there's going to be, there's got to be some, some outreach to sell the concept once we get it, established. But I think, what role I like one of the questions was, well, what role does governance have on the other, on the other committees? I think that's really a good thing that we should probably be sure that we identify. Here's what, how you should consider governance as you do your your working group work. And since, Dom and I and Elizabeth that are listening and participating in all of them, all of the working groups so far, a number of the working groups have already said, well, that's a governance decision. So yes, we support this, but that's a governance decision. So they're saying, I think we should do this, we should do that, but that's up to the governing board. And so I think some of that work is happening. The inertia is already saying that the governance board is going to be responsible for that. So there's a lot of responsibility on the recommendation here. Sorry to be bouncing all over the place, but You know, I think this is just really important, hard work that we're doing here.
I want to jump back if that's okay. Oh, no, I'm not on mute. I want to jump back to Barbara, kind of your breakdown there. And one of the things that I heard in that, and again, it sounds like we're jumping, but there's a lot to discuss, so I apologize, is
No problem.
the prioritization of the needs. So, and guys, correct me if I'm going down the wrong path here, but what that single step, what was that called? I want to make sure I get the terminology.
Yeah, single stage or
Single
one stage.
stage.
Single
dispatch.
stage. I think it's something that we always try to target and achieve in the thought process, but is never truly going to be achievable in us, at least in the short term, the next 10 to 15 years, right? In Vermont, unless it's an system, right? Like that's the only way it could possibly happen. So we aren't going to be able to achieve that. So I think while that's a priority and that's our top one of our top recommendations should be, in all instances, try to keep it to that.
It's right.
But there will be exceptions. I think if we think about it that way, that becomes a recommendation and not necessarily a restriction. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does to
Actually,
me.
one of the
Yes.
recommendations from the tier 3 committee on some of the items that were brought up by MCP was that they wanted to continue transfer of the call so that the dispatch center would have access to the initial caller. They found that helpful to be able to, speak with the caller directly if necessary.
Yep, and I agree with that 110%.
Yep.
I think so. The 911 board's position on one stage, two stage is we try to maximize the number of one stage call handling situations. So if we have a town that is, two of the three responders are dispatched by one of the existing PSAPs, we will direct the 911 calls from that town to that PSAP so that we can have a single stage situation. But in some cases, there's three different centers involved, right? They might, and one of them might not even be or all of them might not be PSAPs. So then it's more like a geographical logic that comes into play on where that call will go. But the goal is to minimize the number of two-stage situations to the extent that we can. So what Mike was just saying, here's my point, is that thinking would align with the existing practice of the 911 board.
That's great.
Took me a long time to get to my point, I know.
We appreciate the example because I appreciate it. I can't speak for Paul, but I appreciate it because then we're not deviating from a standard or a norm that already exists, which is great.
Right. And I think a lot of progress can be made on the concern around single stage and two stage with if we end up with a recommendation for a statewide like interoperable CAD, right? Because now you're transferring the data electronically, which solves all kinds of problems with transferring callers. So I think it would lessen any concern about two-stage call handling, which I didn't even have before the mission critical report came out, and still don't really have. But I think there's certainly ways that we can make the transfer of information, and
I think one thing I heard, so we want to make these bullet points more definitive, for example, instead of should have, should we just say, it's to have decision capability.
Yep.
It'll have rotation.
Yep.
And, will be.
Yep.
I think that's one thing I had. What board be an entity.
Yep.
Annual administrative funding.
To add that.
Money is useless if you don't have the authorization for position numbers to hire somebody to do the work.
Mhm.
Brings up enough, not just asking to have hiring, and perhaps more like the board, not on one board. I mean, we also need to be able to enter into agreements, right? Are we saying that the that, that,
So we're gonna do it. It's in our statute.
Do that.
Oh, even the 911 board works with our system provider. All yes, purchasing and contracting. Yes, a hand in reviewing contract structure and framework. I don't know that I wouldn't of that. Whether or not we would have the authority to, perhaps, I don't know. The wheel of
Beyond that, you with like the RF entering into the contract. But if you want to, on date with, I forget who's
digital.
you have to go through ADS in order to.
Oh, no. It's direct then. So, of course, we have our own IT manager at the 911 board who has a connection up to ADS, but he's an employee. And yeah, that station and oversight of the
incredible. Out of the, once you get out of that swim lane, now people. I think like what you said earlier, Barb, about after a 911 structure that it makes more. It certainly we don't want to bring more eyes to us because we're doing things the way we want to, but not necessarily following established processes, procedures. I have to, go in that direction. Don't be suspicious. Does it have to be approved at the town level because legislators represent the town? Is it enough if this is established government, at the executive level in Vermont government?
I don't know.
Well, I think you would. Oh, yes. Going to be paid for. Something for this and it's at the table.
I mean, this is about who's um, that would be
I guess maybe Mike will bring us to the meeting, but yeah, per se.
No, working in Vermont, it's very unique. You create patients, so but that's probably specific. What things available. And so I want to be sure. Well, I'm not an attorney, and I did make an express last night. I'm here, but I just want to be. I don't want us to figure that out. In the app, there's what they're doing. So we are doing.
We put down what we are some of the next steps for evaluating and recommending governance. Of course, developing structure and are addressed to discuss these. We've discussed recommended items. We modification of the board and develop draft bylaws and the slide deck to discuss, but then develop some initial discussion we've had. Let's take a look at this and let's identify committees, various technologies, training, in here, of course. And state groups. It incorporates a lot of the aspects from some of the suggested models from MCP. Changes things maybe a little bit.
These two these other things.
Have a
Arrows back and forth, right? So it signifies that they're talking. You know, they're right.
These are called. I know
go directly to that. I think so. You remove that. Yep, remove that affiliation and that one. And down that one. So that's my. That's what you're getting at. But that's
I think that works as well. It's just, you know, like we don't do a lot. I don't know about their experiences, but we don't. Subcommittees, we do much like everything goes back in your buff. But you don't use it, right? But you got it. You got it. Right. So.
Right.
I think this, sorry, Paul. I think this makes more sense. It really would probably all report to steering, not to finance, if we were going to have that hierarchy. But I think it makes more sense to have them all report back to the main body.
So in this scenario, so let's walk through. The LMR, let's just say we've got a statewide radio network. It's regionalized and but it's, you know, it's and there's a committee that makes recommendations. And so they make a recommendation that we need to have frequency, you know, in this area. Our members are, you know, we've determined that we need another frequency. And so let's say that's upgrade. And so that's a recommendation that they bring back to the governing board. And then the governing board, you know, has at a minimum asked the finance committee to review it, make sure it makes sense. And then they come up with that, you know, that they also have the approach of how will we pay for it, you know. So, but that's, you know, these, you know, committees, they have defined working responsibilities. And so that would be defined within our bylaws.
That's
See, and maybe it's just because of the age of the 911 board, right? And there were subcommittees in the beginning that worked through many of these same things. But now it's more, there are only occasional subcommittees that are created for some purpose. And all of, like, how are we paying for it? What's it going to cost to add this channel, you know, this frequency, whatever. That all goes back to the staff. So, and all these things would be necessary, at least initially, on this dispatch board.
I think it would be natural over time for additional subcommittees to be created or some to be retired if no longer needed, or to be at least inactive at some period. Yeah, I think that would be natural.
Okay.
Do we want to take a crack at defining regions to be represented at this point, or want to try and come back to that? And I'm sorry, Barb, I may have interrupted you.
No, you're fine. I thought we had defined who we think these participants should be, like maybe on the next slide, or
well, this is what we had previously discussed for the board makeup.
Okay.
I think our assumption was there would be additional participants, certainly down here, that would participate in the subcommittees. So the subcommittees could include potentially representatives from or members from the board, but I would think primarily it would be um, just experts from this throughout the state.
I see. Okay.
Is there
I
anything here
don't
we
know.
want to revisit? This is the list we had last week. I just cleaned up the wording a little bit to make it more consistent, but this is the same list. I think there are what here, 12 or 13? 13.
13.
The only thing that pops into my mind as to whether or not we would need them or ought to include them, it would be the Public Service Department and or the Broadband Board. I mean, would they add value to this group, or maybe they're not necessary?
Well, right now we do identify a broadband subcommittee here,
Yeah.
although that doesn't necessarily mean they need to be represented on the board, but they would certainly have, you would think they would have participation in the subcommittee.
Okay.
Can I ask a question just to follow up on that thought? Barb, how much interaction does the E911 board have with the broadband team right now? I mean, are you leveraging any of their fiber, their investments, or what kind of interaction, just so we can connect the dots, whether or not they should have a seat here as well?
Well, we have we certainly support the work of the broadband board in, rolling out or expanding broadband access across the state, because any improved connectivity anywhere is good for 911 callers and 911 service. We don't have like ongoing meetings with them necessarily. Public service, more generally, we interact with maybe a little bit more, and that could just be because we've historically done it that way too. But we work with public service on our funding model, and on issues related to not so much access to 911, but the state of connectivity generally, right? So there's not a formal relationship at this point, but the outreach happens back and forth as necessary, I guess, is the best way to say that.
So go broadband board. If public safety could influence decisions being made by the broadband board to the benefit of public safety communications, then I think it would be beneficial for them to be on the board so they can hear from the community, this community, on how they could create policy, make investments, guide their vendor relationships to the benefit of public. And I think if that is in case an expectation or an opportunity, then having them participate makes sense to me. And so I think we could justify adding them to the board. And that's on them. When you say public service, when we talk about public service, I oftentimes, and I, unfortunately, fortunately, it has changed over time, but in many cases, public service ends up having its own communication systems. And sometimes they're not interoperable, and we need them to be interoperable. That's one of the things we talked about for the Agency of Transportation. So, if we can, get them to think, and both public safety and public service, to think, well, how can we complement one another? How can we share assets? How can we merge them? Then then that it would make sense. We might want to consider them on the board as well. My thinking on anyone that's on the board is how can we mutually be a benefit to one another and to enhance interoperability where needed to wide area response situations, because this is, what are the major events, public safety events in Vermont? And most of them are flooding. You're flooding. Yeah, you fortunately you don't have as many fires as, because you're not dry. The state's not typically dry, but the state really doesn't, the rain just destroys you. So when you're looking at wide area multi-agency response, if they are part of the response, then they, might make sense to engage them as well.
It's actually earthquakes. Those are our major issues, just to throw that out there.
Have you had an earthquake?
We have
Oh,
one.
we have, yeah,
We had
We do.
but
Yeah.
they're
but they're not major.
not major. Not guys, everybody ought to be knocking on wood somewhere right now,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be a crazy week now based on this discussion alone.
Yeah.
You have snow events, but you handle them well. It's just when the melts and the rains, and man, all the stories I've read is really flooding is a
Flooding.
significant.
You're right. You're right. It is.
You're right. I know.
Hurricanes, not so much. Flooding, yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you might have a tsunami too. I forgot.
I think I need to think a little bit more about the broadband board and the Department of Public Service and their
Okay.
representation on the board. I feel like an initial thought is without the broadband board people there may be major work being done that would intersect or could intersect with the work of this group that we wouldn't know about. It would be, we'd constantly have to be reaching out, or it just feels like it might be a blind spot if they're not represented there. But
Well, and we've been told over and over again that we should not be considering just LMR, that we should also be looking at how to bring LTE to the entire state for public
Right.
safety reasons.
right.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's where and that's your reference back to public service, Barb, because they are kind of leading the charge on determining, testing coverage and mapping it. Yeah,
Right.
I think it makes sense. We don't want to. They may make sense for particularly because they are entrusted with that commercial carrier relationship.
Right.
Right.
Yes, and when you look at we look at future migration, and Telebate's been doing a lot of work on this in general for some of our customers already. What is the role of commercial carrier networks versus what is the role in the future, and might we be able to migrate away from LMR, for example, or engaging them more? And of course, I think that discussion is going to go on a period of time until public safety feels comfortable that yes, they can migrate. Certainly in Vermont, that's not the case, but we don't necessarily have that. Our radio networks aren't much better than their cellular networks, if at all. So, but in a number of communities, ongoing discussion of what expanding the role of commercial carrier networks for public safety communications. And so I think if we don't engage then they're not thinking what our future might be. So, it might be prudent to put them on a step further because of their evolving role. Not so much today, but likely more in the future.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The consensus is to.
Say add them both, right? They are distinct too. The broadband board is separate from the public service department.
Yeah.
I like you got from the board advance.
Yeah.
Barb,
Yeah,
I assume that
Not a representative.
the broadband board is all.
I'm not sure. Sure on that.
What's the correct terminology? Public service.
Department. The department. Yeah.
So, Elizabeth, please to provide information back to the working group on the composition of the broadband board. We can get that information.
Yep.
Can we go back to the top representative, two above, and the executive director? Or we should, do we need to go to that level, or should we say a representative from the same with the with the Department of Public Safety and Enhanced 911 board?
A representative, and then the 911 board will tell me I'm the representative. I guess how that. Although, I mean, if you say a representative from the board, that implies an actual board member, I would think,
Right.
but which I don't know. I don't know the best way to do that.
Said everyone below, and
Right.
like of the top two, like we've designated those people, but they're probably
then-
the boards. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It might be better to go the other way, like down at the bottom, say, the Secretary of Transportation or designee,
Yeah.
the Commissioner of Public Service or designee, like the Commissioner of Department of Public Safety.
Yeah,
Right.
as long as we're matching them, I agree with you.
I think it would be important to have the specific titles for safety. If that means changing it else, that's fine. They all get to do for the groups. The chair or designee or something like that. It'll close on time. It's about 10 of.
Yeah, I'll update this and pass it around to make sure I get this accurate.
Just when you're doing that for the associations, I think I like having just a representative from, like, the Firefighters Association, the Police Chiefs Association. I don't know that we necessarily want the chairs or the presidents of those to feel obligated. But for the state agencies, I think it should be the commissioner or secretary or their designee.
Okay.
Just to show deference to,
Right.
whatever, to the commissioner.
Okay. Should this be designee up here from the E911 board?
I don't know. I've never been given that option before, but I suppose you could to make it
It should.
distinct.
As this matures, you won't personally necessarily need to be there at every meeting. You could send Jared
Right.
or somebody.
Right.
Okay, and you mentioned we're 10 minutes to our time. Just very quickly, we also at the next meeting then we'll address key charter elements discussed before, this and then we also want to discuss, as is mentioned in Act 78, to identify the budget needs. So certain, these are some of the categories that we felt we would need to address. And there are some, we can make some suggestions here. There were some suggestions provided by MCP that we can review as well. But since we are low on time, I'll move back to the agenda. We just talked essentially about next steps. We've got to continue on in our definition of the key elements of the governance model. And we need to schedule for next meeting.
Yes, so looking at next week, we have a task force meeting on Wednesday. In the past, we've held our meeting right after that. Is that something that would work for Mike and Paul?
Sorry.
I'm actually going to have to miss next Wednesday's task force meeting.
Oh.
Okay. Well, what about
Well, it would have worked for me.
what about Thursday, the 11th?
Unfortunately, I will not be able to make that either.
All right, Paul, since you're being the
Sorry.
difficult one.
I'm sorry.
What? No, no, I'm kidding.
Sorry,
What,
just
do you have some?
just happens to be a bad week. We have Mike not with us, but we had the other test, the tier 1 meeting on Tuesday. Would
Correct.
it be too much to do it prior to or after that?
Ah, okay.
For you two to decide.
Yeah. I prefer to day or two, if that,
Tuesday, what time?
so that would make it at, let's see, 2. So that would make it at probably noon to 1:30.
Next Tuesday, I can't do that time. I'm sorry.
Okay. So I'm free Monday anytime.
Are you tied up all Tuesday, Mike, or just that time?
I could do Tuesday. So just to be clear, on Monday I could do anytime between noon and 4, and on Tuesday I could do anytime between 9 and 11.
I need to put the kibosh on Tuesday. I can't do it Tuesday.
Monday at 1.
Works for me.
Great.
And if it's
Monday
Monday
at
at 1, then we'll need to get the information up on the website, the call information ASAP, right?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Yep.
within the next hour.
Ooh, yeah.
Well, we can do
Hopefully
that.
You can do it.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you make
I
that,
might
Rick?
not-
As
yeah,
a
I
side
can do
note
my
for
best.
me, remember that I may or may not be in the office Monday, and hopefully that's okay. I may or may not have jury duty, and I won't find out until tomorrow.
Oh,
that's right.
boy.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
boy. As long as
Well,
somebody
let's-
can start the recording, I think we're,
Let's schedule it and see if we can get through. See how things fall out.
okay,
Okay, Monday
Right.
at 1 o'clock.
excellent. Okay, on to public comments. So, it looks like Kate dropped off. Paul, have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, knowing the time is very short, I always have thoughts as the meeting was going on, and I'm not going to go into any crazy detail, but and to start currently going back to the earlier conversation on VSP or DPS in general, as to maybe some discussions in past commissioners that where we would dispatch for VP, or we don't want to dispatch for other agencies, and I'm probably not privy to. I think here is that, hey, we don't take agencies for two reasons. One reason being that for quite some time we had a staffing crisis, and that is still kind of lingering into today. We still have a quasi staffing crisis at least our Williston PSTAP at the moment. And of course, by taking on new agencies, that of course is going to be a burden. But beside that fact, a lot, if not all of the agencies that we currently dispatch for, we do not receive funding from those agencies.
Mhm.
And that's another factor. And again, not that you want to make it is about public safety, but again, from a standpoint of would any other PSAP, take on a new agency if they want to take a new agency, right? So
Right.
I think there's a quasi different standard between us, and we're currently performing a service for a lot of entities that are not, and that doesn't mean we still don't give them in the past, the mid-levels for fire agency PSAP might do. And a lot of that has to do again that I was thinking to do with so shadow because it's obligation to make it's not other agencies. They may choose not to. But if you want to have uniformity, having that type of an accreditation kind of leads to uniformity in one way or another. And I also look at that as being from a funding standpoint. And again, I'm not even getting into the whole financial aspect of it, but it could some PSAPs can do, it can be voluntary whether or not they take on our standards. But if you don't meet that standard, maybe some type of funding stream as well. So just thoughts, again, just throwing them out there off the top of my head. I think that was the main thing. I had some other thoughts, but there'll be plenty of other meetings, I have a feeling.
I think you're right on that. But it is a reminder, I'll just comment on the equity issue, right? I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of the driving factors that started this whole conversation.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
All right. Is there anything else from anyone? I love it when a meeting ends on time. So, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. Adjourn. Thank you very much. That's a lot.
Can you get that meeting notes out right?
Thank you.